there, and thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I want to make a quick shootout between three of my favorite music making boxes, the MPC X SE, the Push 3 Standalone, and the OPX-Y. If you're wondering why I'm using the MPC X in this comparison instead of the Live 2, which might be more logical, it's mainly because I wanted to compare the top model in each of the series and keep the price tag on $2,000 or more. I'll be ranking them based on things like their internal synths, step sequencing capabilities, audio recording capabilities, and so on. Also, please bear in mind, these are just my opinions, and I would really like to hear what you think about these, so I'll meet you down in the comments to continue the discussion after the video is over. So without further ado, here we go. Number 1. Hardware specs. Push 3 Standalone comes in hot with 8 gigs of RAM, an Intel processor, 256 gigabytes of internal storage, 64 MPE capable pads, and an LED screen. MPC X SE, on the other hand, has 4 gigs of RAM, an ARM processor, 48 gigabytes of internal storage, 16 velocity sensitive pads with aftertouch, and a full color tiltable touchscreen. Finally, the OPX-Y has 512 megabytes of RAM, dual CPUs, 8 gigabytes of internal storage, and an OLED screen that, although is color capable, is mostly monochrome by design. Though all three of them can be expanded with an audio interface through USB, the MPC X SE on its own is the undisputed I/O winner here, featuring 2 XLR inputs with phantom power, 4 1/4-inch audio inputs, 2 RCA inputs, 2 5-pin MIDI inputs, and 4 MIDI outputs, 8 CV gate outputs, 8 1/4-inch audio outputs, plus 2 headphone outputs, 2 pedal inputs, 2 USB-A ports, and 1 USB port. It's basically meant to be the central hardware hub of any studio. The Push 3 comes with 2 1/4-inch audio inputs, 2 1/4-inch audio outputs, 1/4-inch headphone jack, optical in and out ports, TRS MIDI in and out, USB-A and USB-C ports, and 2 foot switch pedals that can also be used for CV. Finally, the OPX-Y has 1 USB-C port and 4 mini jack ports, which function as audio out, audio in, MIDI in, and a very interesting multi-out port which can be configured to be MIDI out, CV gate out, sync, or auxiliary audio out. As far as hardware is concerned, I'd say that the first place is pretty much a draw between the Push 3 and the MPC. Considering that the Push has more horsepower, but MPC has more connectivity and knobs and the touchscreen, it really comes down to what's more important to you. The only thing I think we can all agree on is that the OPX-Y comes in a solid third place. Number 2. Onboard synths and sounds. Whether or not you enjoy the sounds they make will probably be one of the most important features to decide which one of these is for you. All three of these machines have onboard proprietary synth engines as well as effects, but they vary wildly in capabilities, flavor, and limitations. The Push 3 features the synthesizer plugins that you find in Ableton Live and offers you a very modern and hi-fi sound palette. You get a whole array of effects as well that you can chain on each track with no real hard limit as to how many effects per track, at least as far as I know of. For me, the standout feature on the Push 3 is the MPE and Poly Aftertouch, which really makes the Push 3 a proper instrument and allows for an amazing level of expression in pretty much everything you play. The OPX-Y features 8 internal engines that, very much in the teenage engineering style, are pretty quirky, and even though they're pretty limited in the amount of parameters available to tweak, they do cover a much wider range of sounds than I would have originally thought. They fit the sound aesthetic of the XY nicely, and I've been able to explore multiple genres of music without feeling limited. A standout feature in the XY is that the synths and patches are linked to the individual patterns, not the tracks, so you can have different patches, synths, or samplers on the same track using different patterns, which really opens things up. Where the XY does feel distinctly limited for this price range though, is in the actual usable effects department. Although you get 6 effects, there are only 2 available master effects slots for all the tracks, which feels pretty constrained. Credit where credit is due though, the effects themselves sound amazing, and you also have a master EQ that can act as a sort of DJ style filter, and is honestly pretty great. On the MPC, you get a mix of synths and the ability to buy more engines like the Mini D and the Jura, and perhaps most notably, a selection of virtual instruments like the stage piano and electric piano. I say most notable because I actually sold my Roland Phantom after I got the pianos on the MPC. They're that good. In the effects department, the MPC features lots of effects, but it's important to note that there is a significant quality variation among them. The older effects are pretty vanilla, but the newer air effects like the Air Flavor Pro or the Delay Pro are among my favorite effects of all time, and that's including hardware pedals. A significant limitation concerning the synths and effects though is that you can only have up to 8 plugin instances at a time and only 4 effects per track. You can of course expand the effects through the use of submixes, but it's still something to be aware of. Although they all sound pretty amazing to me, I'm putting the XY in the last place, mostly because of only being able to use 2 effects at a time. First place was a hard call, but I'm gonna have to give it to the Push 3 by a very narrow margin on this one. The MPC has some of the best plugins and effects out there right now, and I find myself often gravitating towards the Jura, the Stage Piano, and the Air Delay Pro when I'm making my music. However, the sheer expressiveness and powerful emotions that I can draw out of the Push 3, thanks to its amazingly sensitive MPE pads, make it exceptional in terms of just being able to speak through your music. Number 3. Portability and battery life. It really should come as no surprise that number 1 in portability and battery life is the OPXY with its minuscule form factor and its 16-hour battery life. Number 2 is then obviously Push 3, though it's still a pretty hefty device and the battery struggles to reach up to 2 hours. Judging the MPC-X by its portability is like judging a fish for its ability to climb a tree, but I actually do take it around for a spin every now and then, thanks to today's sponsor, Analog Cases. Analog Cases makes high-quality storage and transport solutions for the most popular synths and Grooveboxes on the market, and I've been using them for years, way before I even had a channel. For taking my OPXY to work, Glide Case. Want to take my Push 3 on a road trip? Track Pack Backpack. Taking the MPC-X SE for a gig at my grandma's retirement home? I grab that Unison case for days, baby. The cases are as roadworthy as they are stylish, and if you use my affiliate link down below, you get a 10% discount on any of your purchases, and I get a small kickback. Thank you, Analog Cases, for sponsoring today's video. Number 4. MIDI Sequencing. Now, just in case you thought the XY was going to be a total washout in this battle royale, strap in because it's going to get a major comeback in this category. As far as MIDI sequencing goes, both MPC and Push 3, though not Elektron box level, both offer probabilities in automation as well as features that feel similar to parameter locking but not quite. The Push 3, though miles better than the sequencing experience on the Push 2, is still in my eyes the weaker of the bunch. It offers a few sequencing modes that use the button grid that work amazingly well for drums and samples, but when it comes to melodic parts and synths, I find it gets a bit more confusing. Thanks to the new jog wheel though, it becomes much more manageable, but more than a few times I've ended up wondering why I don't just fire up the computer and fine-tune things with a mouse. On MPC, the experience is much better, especially with the touchscreen, though it can be both a blessing and a curse. Depending on your dexterity, the dryness of your fingers, and your general aim, selecting notes can be a hassle sometimes. Finally, in an indisputable first place comes the OPXY. It's definitely the most fun and powerful of the three when it comes to recording, editing, and just messing around with general MIDI. You get a huge array of MIDI effects, or step components as Teenage Engineering calls them, which range from octave changes, skipping steps, ratchets, and probabilities for the notes or even the steps. The pattern and scene system also allows for a great way to experiment without losing sight of the whole picture, something that the new Arranger mode on MPC3 also has. Number 5. Sampling and mangling. All three of these machines feature different levels of sampling and audio mangling, and it's important to note that all of them support multi-sampled instruments. What sets the MPC apart though is that it has a feature that allows you to auto multi-sample an instrument with an amazing amount of detail and fidelity, allowing for different levels of velocity and note intervals for a higher quality copy of that original patch. Push 3 can load multi-sampled instruments, but as far as I know, you can't actually make your own in standalone mode. The XY does allow you to multi-sample your own instruments, but you have to do it manually, and it only allows up to one layer. The XY features two more sampler engines, one where a sample is pitch shifted across the keyboard, and the drum sampler, which allows for assigning one-shots to each one of the keys. It is important to note that you can only sample up to 20 seconds on the XY. You can mangle the sample in a few ways like pitch shifting and reversing, but there's no time stretching or sample chopping here. I think it's pretty safe to say that the Push 3 and MPC are pretty much state-of-the-art when it comes to sampling. Both have time stretching and pitch shifting capabilities, with Push offering a few different algorithms to better suit melodic or rhythmic samples. They also allow for sample chopping, creating sample kits or drum racks from those chops, and allow for multiple sound design options like envelopes or LFOs, and of course playing those samples chromatically. The MPC edges out the Push 3 with the inclusion of the touchscreen, which often makes this process much quicker when fine-tuning and selecting different slices. Here I'm going to have to give MPC the first place, thanks to its sound design and multi-sampling capabilities. Second place goes to the Push 3, and finally, OPXY. Number 6. Working with long-form audio. Now, working with long-form audio in a more traditional songwriting sense, as in recording entire verses of acoustic instruments and vocals, isn't really something that the XY was made for, and that might be evident from its short sample time limitation. Though I have shown in a few other of my videos that there are workarounds for it, the XY instantly comes at third place here. The power struggle then lies between the MPC and the Push. MPC is pretty capable when it comes to long samples and audio recordings, and you get up to 8 dedicated audio tracks. Beyond that though, you need to start working with audio as samples instead of dedicated tracks, which can be done, but it's a bit more similar to my workaround for audio in the XY. The Push 3 on the other hand is an absolute powerhouse for audio recordings. I've never hit the limit on number of clips you can actually record, and I've done multiple takes on it with no problems whatsoever. You can basically have as many audio tracks as you want, and if you factor in that you can later on comp them in Ableton, it's pretty much the perfect audio sketchpad, as I've said in a previous video, and that's why I'm giving first place to the Push on this one. Number 7. Live performance capabilities. One of the fun things about having an all-in-one music workstation is the ability to take it with you and perform your music on it. In that aspect, Push 3 allows for assigning macros to certain parameters like filter cutoff or beat repeats, and also the flexibility of launching clips either in rows or individually to make up and modify the song as you play along. It's important to note though that the standalone Push 3 doesn't have a song mode as of the time of this video. Another amazing aspect of the Push 3 for live performance are, once again, its MPE pads, which essentially lets you perform the Push as a live instrument with a backing track. The MPC X has a full arranger mode where it pretty much organizes your clips and tracks linearly, pretty much as you would in a traditional DAW. You also get a lot of performability out of the multiple parameters at your disposal via the 16 Q-Link knobs. The little LED strips beneath each knob really help in a performance setting because you always know where you are. Besides triggering notes or samples on the pads, you can also play around with the XY effects on the touchscreen for some fun improvisations. In this category, I'd say that the Push and the MPC are pretty much tied, but they are absolutely blown away by the XY. If there is something that the XY completely excels at, it is on-the-spot live improvisation and performance. You get a lot of things to do live on the XY, like the step components, the punch-in effects, the brain feature that allows for the smart transposition of the entire sequence, a mixer, a 3-band EQ, and a tape that allows for some pretty fun tricks. You also have an incredibly flexible and playable song mode that gives you some structure for your performance while still allowing you to jump around and chase sequences on the fly. It's pretty much a live performance powerhouse, and it rightfully takes first place here. Number 8. Taking it to the DAW. Even though I love making music in DAW-less mode, whenever I want to really finish or fine-tune a song, I usually take it to my DAW for the final touches. In my case, that DAW would be Ableton Live. So third place here has to go to the XY, which to this day at least, has no ways of really exporting your tracks or stems except actually sitting down and recording them one by one on a separate device or directly to your DAW. Thankfully, most of my tracks on the XY feel finished already in the box, and I haven't ever felt the need to take them to the DAW. But at this price point, it does feel like some sort of exporting should be standard, even if it was only MIDI. The MPC comes in second place with its ability to export stems, entire tracks, the mix, or even MIDI tracks into separate files that you can later import into a DAW, which makes transferring projects from the MPC to Ableton pretty easy, but not as easy as the number 1 winner here, which is Push 3. It's important to note that if your main DAW is something other than Ableton, the Push might be lower on this list, but if you're like me, then the Push is just the most seamless transition imaginable from Groovebox to the DAW. Just hook it up to the computer, open up your project in Ableton, and that's pretty much it. It'll do everything on itself. You even have the added benefit that the plugins will still work, and even the controller is already mapped to Ableton. It's one of the best alternatives for someone who wants a hybrid workflow where they start off on the Groovebox and they end in the DAW. Some final thoughts. Even though these shootouts are fun, they rarely tell the whole story, and each individual person has to find what makes these machines valuable to them, and if and how they fit within their own workflow. You might value portability over power, or a fluid workflow over sound design options. The truth is, these three have each a very valuable place in my setup right now, and I use them all for different duties and moods when I'm making music. And I hope you give your own input as to why you would recommend one over the other in the comments below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week. See you next time.